Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am your host, Courtney Anderson. As always, you can come to courtneyanderson.com for more information. And I am thrilled that you are with me today. Today we have a show that is part of our Educators Eden series. Of course, our Educators Eden series is where we share, reminisce sometimes, applaud, celebrate educators. And for our educators, we are constantly coming up with different potential solutions to create more of a paradise on earth for them in their educational pursuits. That's why it's Educators Eden. We are literally creating the absolute most enjoyable educational environment possible. So today in our series, our show specifically is, how do I pick the right college for my first online teaching position? How do I pick the right college for my first online teaching position? And this is a interesting topic. Part of the reason that this show is on the schedule and that we're doing it is that there are so many people who I've talked to who ask me questions about teaching, and ask me questions specifically about teaching in a distributed environment, distributed learning environment, where the faculty member and the students aren't necessarily sitting in the same room at the same time. And so I have been really pleased that I've been able to teach college for many, many years, different levels. I've taught everything from associates to undergrad, 4-year degrees to graduate school, which is what I currently teach. And I love the ability to teach online because I'm able to work with students around the world. And I'm also able to be in a more, in some ways, a little bit more demanding environment, because I have to be in a class more than just a traditional couple of hours for a lecture. And I also have the ability to broaden my horizons by being part of an online learning environment. So we've done some other programs just talking about online teaching in general, some of the challenges, describing whether or not it's an easy process or not. I made the argument in that program that online teaching is challenging and exciting, but I wouldn't agree with the contention that it's actually, quote, easier than a traditional classroom for many reasons. The time investment, the challenges of communicating in an environment that is through internet technology, whether it's just ensuring that you have access to that internet technology all the time, things of that nature. So let's delve into the specifics, though. There's someone who's decided, you know what, I'm moving with this. I'm moving forward with a decision. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to teach online. And I just want to make sure that I'm finding, quote, the right college, the right school for my first online teaching position. So this is for somebody who's new to online teaching. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're new to teaching. I mean, someone could be teaching for decades and now decide, okay, I'm going to go ahead and see what this online teaching is like. So let's move through this process from the perspective of whether it's a novice educator or a very experienced educator, but we're all new and trying to figure out what's the right school for our first online teaching position. So the beginning of the process, I would ask, what's the goal? Right? So why have you decided that you want to teach online? In other words, is it because you are interested in being able to reach students in different geographic locations? Is it because you're interested in teaching different content, and maybe there's the ability beyond a campus in your local environment for you to teach different content that's exciting and interesting for you? Is it that the idea of, I'm not going to have to deal with traffic or, getting on public transportation or in my, private vehicle to get somewhere? It would potentially give me a little bit more flexibility in my, complete schedule. You need to be really honest about why you want to do it, because that's going to help answer the question about what's the right college for your first online teaching position. When I started online teaching, it was somewhere around 2003. And part of the reason was I was traveling a lot for my consulting and corporate education work. And so, by a lot, I was traveling, upwards 250 days 300 days a year some years. So I was constantly traveling to all these locations for my corporate training and keynote speaking events. And so it wasn't even possible to teach in a traditional classroom. How do I know this? Well, I learned the hard way. Like many things in life that I've experienced, I learned the hard way. I had been teaching in the local Austin, Texas area where I was based at the time. And I had just sort of started traveling to do some corporate training while I was teaching a semester at a local campus. And I was thinking, oh, it's not going to be that hard. My class only meets, one evening a week. And then the challenge would come up where I would have a conflict between these schedules or between my ability to prepare adequately for class. And I learned the hard way that you can't do both. If you're teaching on campus, then you need to be as much as possible based in that area. And if I wanted to teach, which I love doing, right? That was the whole purpose. Why did I want to teach online? Because I love teaching, and there was no other way for me to do it. And also be able to pursue my other enjoyments of, corporate training and keynote speaking and things of that nature. I couldn't do them physically in the same space at the same time. So the only way to continue to teach would be to teach through distributed learning. And the first school that I taught for, and this is helpful for this program, is, so I sort of go researching, who looks like they're hiring, right? Just, random, web searches, who needs adjunct faculty. And so I'd found a school that was a new sort of startup school in the southeast part of the United States. And I thought, okay, great. And this is before the technology like the internet exists today, where you have these elaborately constructed software systems where you log into a virtual class and there's, multimedia, and it's all set up really beautifully, and there's online gradebooks and all this. This was back where the online class consisted of, basically, it was correspondence learning, which has been around forever, basically, not forever, but for quite a while. The idea, correspondence learning is, somebody is mailed their assignments, and then they work on them and they mail them back to the faculty member who, grades and gives feedback and then mails that back. That's correspondence learning, which has been around for decades. And so this first online teaching experience I had was with this school in the southeastern part of the U.S. that was a relatively new school, if I remember correctly. And so there was a lot of excitement. They were just starting. They were bringing on, new faculty with this whole new program and all these big ideas. And so I thought, okay, great. And it was basically, correspondence. The only difference is, instead of somebody mailing in their assignments, they emailed them. So that was what made it, I guess, internet based or online. But there was no, software. You didn't log into some kind of classroom somewhere. There was no online, grade book or anything. It was just, they would email you, here's your student. And they'd email the student, here's your faculty member. They had let me know what the course textbook they recommended was. I looked at it and made sure it seemed like it would be appropriate for this class. And then I created my own syllabus. I created my own assignments. And so it was very much like traditional classroom teaching, like I'd had prior to that at other universities, University of Texas, and a school in Austin called Houston Tillotson. So I had been used to this, right? They give you your class, and then you go create the syllabus, you create the assignments, and then you're in charge. And so that's what this first experience was like. The only difference was that I only had one student at a time, and I would just individually, give the student the assignments and the due dates, and then the student would work through the assignments, submit them to me. I would grade them and give them their feedback, and we just did it like that. And I actually really enjoyed it. It was great because it allowed me to sort of feel like I'm getting that need met, that need and desire I've talked a lot about in these education or educators Eden series. I've talked a lot about the desire, really, that I have to teach. I like it. It makes me happy. So if there's somewhere I can hang my hat and get to be a faculty member and be a professor, then I'm going to do it. And at the time, this was great because I was traveling constantly, but I always had, of course, my computer with me because I needed it for all of the things that I do, and this was perfect. So I'm getting to be, at some level, a faculty member, or at some level, generically, Professor Anderson. And I'm remembering back now, I had some pretty interesting students that were, interesting. They were intelligent. They had, unique ideas. They had reasons for why they were pursuing this new school and this degree. Many of them also had other, business obligations and or family obligations that explain, why they weren't able to go to the traditional campus and meet that schedule. And I really enjoyed it. And unfortunately, that school, this is unbelievable, but Hurricane Katrina came through the southeast part of the U.S. and I didn't hear anything from the school for weeks. I was worried. And so finally, sort of the basic understanding I had is that Hurricane Katrina came through this part of the country. And of course, Hurricane Katrina, many people around the world remember the damage it did and the suffering and what happened to people in New Orleans and that area. And so anyway, the school was located geographically in that southeast part of the country. And basically after that natural disaster came through, that it sort of wiped out their resources and their institution, and they never, to the best of my ability, were able to move forward. So that school ended. And one of the things that you want to think about when you're picking your first online teaching position, again, what do you want out of this? So if you're just sort of like I was, hey, I just want to teach, and I need to be able to do it where I can, be present via the internet, but I can't necessarily agree to be, in Austin or Boston or Miami or Zurich or whatever city on certain, every week on Tuesday and Thursday, because I got a lot of other stuff on my plate. So my needs were met. I was willing to take a risk on, a new school. I didn't necessarily have any, fantasy or dream that I'm going to take this one teaching opportunity and turn it into some sort of, full-time traditional tenure track position. I just wanted to kind of get my feet wet and see what it was all about. If you're in the position where you just want to see what online teaching is about, and you already have other, financial opportunities, and you're not concerned really about, the money or prestige or anything like that, then just go out and find wherever you can. And now, and all these years later, there's so many opportunities and there's so many different vehicles. They're institutions that are sort of set up generically to be, free education opportunities where volunteers can come in and teach whatever they want to teach, and then volunteer students. Obviously, all students are volunteers, but students can come and so look into some of those. They're free, so they don't pay anything, but they could be really exciting if you just want to get your feet wet. So the right college for you, if you want to get your feet wet and you're not interested in money, is either a free opportunity where you can just go online and start teaching whatever content you want to wherever, and there's a proliferation of those, and I strongly encourage those. They're great. It teaches you what it's like to kind of get into the mindset of, okay, I'm teaching, but I'm not sitting in a room with a student. I'm either electronically communicating with them, and that's great. Now, obviously, if you have financial interests and or you have specific and honest career goals, and this is something I think is really important to talk about. So many of the programs and the things that we discuss on this show and through all the other platforms that I do is this idea of being pragmatic, right? Deal with the world as it is. And we talk a lot about surpassing our goals. But the key to a lot of this is being honest with ourselves. And this is what I think is an obstacle for many of us at times to meeting or surpassing our goals. If somebody's goal is, look, I want a prestigious, high-income teaching job, then you need to be honest with that. And there's no need to go spend time at a free organization because A, it's no money, and B, since it's free, it's probably not a vehicle directly at that institution for you to go get a traditionally, higher income teaching job. Now, some people at this point are, probably, oh, no teachers are paid well, all the teaching. Okay. Money is all relative, A. And B, depends on what you teach. Now, my perspective is going to be based on somebody who teaches mostly business law. That's mostly what I teach. It's what I teach now exclusively, but mostly that's what I've taught historically. It's what I started off teaching, business law, undergrad, the University of Texas at Austin. It's what I teach now in an MBA program for University of Maryland, University College. I'm so proud. In the middle of that, I've done a lot of different types of classes, different types of law. I've done, criminal justice classes, and I've done different types of business classes, management, things of that nature. But my sort of most consistent area is obviously where I have the majority of my degrees, and it's what I do for a living. So obviously, as a lawyer, myself, and in the U.S., the degree I earned, a doctorate of jurisprudence, and I have an MBA, and I own little businesses, and this is what I do. So that's sort of my sweet spot. Now, but I have other areas, and I'm happy to teach, within other areas of law or other areas of business, or just sort of basic general education classes on either critical thinking, things of that nature, because of course I have I have experience and I use these skills. But my primary focus, of course, is the intersection of business and law. That's what I teach, and that's often what I talk about. We separate out little pieces of it with different programs, but even here, in my private personal practice, that's the intersection of what I do, overarching big picture law and business. So if you want to make money, then you need to make totally different decisions about what the right college is for you. Obviously, it's going to take off the free opportunities. I would also argue this: the range of teaching income online is incredible. I personally have seen everything from a 9-week 3-credit undergrad class that the whole class is $1,200 roughly in faculty, to classes that are similarly, 8 weeks or so, that are $2,500, to teaching at institutions where the credit hour is 12, 14, $1,500 per credit hour. So literally there's a span of everywhere from barely $1,000 up to right around maybe close to $10,000, and that's a lot of span, right? So what's the difference? Okay, well, it's like anything else, and I'm being very broad, as I always have to be in these short programs, but basically it's like anything else. What's the difference between a college that is a very open admission, low tuition, and one that's very selective, and the tuition is quadruple? Well, it's often the perception of the institution, the longevity of the institution, the specialization of the institution. Obviously, if you're teaching at a medical school or a law school, a business school, perhaps you're in a different position than if you're teaching undergrad, maybe theater arts or something. Not that these aren't comparable, and this is a huge argument within education. Some people's perception is, oh, why are certain faculty members paid more? The argument, of course, that all knowledge is worthwhile, I totally support. But the reality is that different types of programs are going to draw different types of students, different numbers of enrollment, and you're also going to be able, and I'm not trying to be anything other than as sort of broadly accurate as I can. I have different opportunities with an associate's degree in general education from my community college than I do, with a PhD, from MIT. I mean, these are just different degrees. Now, of course, obviously they take different amounts of time and things of that nature. And I know a lot of educators are thinking, well, duh, I know this, right? Like I teach college. But here's the difference. Here's the situation. I've been in this field teaching online and for a little over a decade now, and I've encountered a lot of people who come up to me and they'll say, look, I'm going to teach online. I'm like, great, okay, well, what's your education? Oh, well, I have an associate's degree. Well, that's great, but an associate's degree, for most, if not any school that I'm aware of, that's regionally accredited. And in the United States, there's different accrediting agencies for universities and schools. Of course, around the world, there are different rules. But in the United States, they basically have the kind of the idea of the gold standard is regional accreditation. And so you're not going to be able to teach college typically with an associate's degree. You typically aren't qualified to teach college typically with a bachelor's degree. You typically would need at least some graduate degree. And in many instances, you need a terminal degree, which is sort of the highest level you can earn in a certain field. So that's not anything that I made up. That's the reality. So if you want to teach online, you can teach online in many instances at these free institutions. In many instances, not now, some of those institutions have the same requirements, that they have certain educational standards. But many free opportunities, or just places where anyone can teach or put any content up, and it's open to everybody. So there are no requirements for someone to have a certain education. Then you could teach online. Again, though, you're typically not being paid. Although in some instances you can put a program online. Maybe it's about how to knit sweaters the best way, and you get great people, you get people around the world who want to pay for your program. Some of these programs will let you create your own program and then charge tuition for someone to come to it. It's up to you, though. The institution's not paying you, but you create your own program, and if you get the enrollment and somebody wants to pay for tuition, that's great. You can make money certainly that way. If you're looking at somebody who had the traditional concept of higher education, typically where you enter into a job at a certain rank and you're promoted up potentially to the highest level. Many institutions would be a sort of a full professor. And then in many institutions, traditionally, at some point, if the job was one that was set up, you would be able to have the opportunity for tenure, which is sort of ideally this idea where somebody's intellectual freedom is given the best possible protection by allowing them to have job protection. And in the United States, especially, this is a very important. Now, in other parts of the world, it's different because there's different rules about employment in general. But in the United States, especially, where most people are at will, employment at will in the United States, which very basically means that someone can quit a job at any time, with or without notice or cause, and that in many instances they can be fired or terminated at any time, with or without notice. You don't have to tell them you're doing it ahead of time, and you don't have to give them cause. You don't have to give them any reason. Now, there's some exceptions to this, but very few in the United States. Now, this is totally different in other parts of the world, but in the U.S. especially, when that's what the majority of people experience is their job situation, the idea that you would potentially have a job or you have protection where they can't just fire you at any time, with or without notice or with or without cause, is attractive. And so in higher education, historically, this idea of tenure, and not just the idea, but the existence of tenure has been something that's, it's also a huge accomplishment because it's typically provided to someone who has demonstrated a pattern and practice of high caliber work, and has met in their field the highest standards, and has been then determined that there's someone who is in a potential position to receive these tenure appointments, which is a wonderful thing for people who receive them in many instances. Not always. Of course, this is fraught with, angst, anxiety, and, allegations of unfairness. And there's a whole bunch of discussion, especially in the United States, about whether, tenure is the greatest thing or it's the most horrible thing. That's neither here nor there. If you're teaching online, you need to decide why you're doing it. If you're just doing it because you just want to do it, then I suggest use one of the free vehicles that has no restrictions. If you want to do it for money, then you need to sit and look at what the spread is. And I just gave you my rough understanding, somewhere between, maybe less than or right around $1,000 up to, probably closer to $10,000 per class. But what's the difference? Well, it's like anything else, probably. The higher, more expensive, the programs that are going to pay more, the institutions that are going to pay more, are typically going to be ones that you've heard of. They're large institutions. They have a long history. They typically are going to have a lot of requirements for faculty to be potentially qualified to teach there in terms of education, other scholarship, professional reputation, things of this nature. So, it's like anything else. It's incredibly competitive to teach at programs that typically are going to pay more, but that just makes sense, sort of basic supply and demand. I know a lot of people who said, "Oh, I want to teach online." They go and they teach online, and they teach for very little money, and then they get very angry and say, "Hey, look at all the time I put into this, and it was $1,000 over 2 months, and all the time I put into it with students, sending me emails and questions and me trying to grade papers and everything. I ended up working for like $4 an hour. It was horrible. I've been abused and bad things have happened to me." My argument would be that I've never gone into an environment where they don't tell you up front what the pay would be. Now, obviously, if somebody lied and said, "Hey, we're going to give you $8,000 a class," and then it turns out later that they only were going to give you $800, well, then you have a legal claim. I mean, that's fraud, right? Hopefully you have the paperwork or documentation showing that they, the lie. That would be something I absolutely totally understand that people have cheated you. But most of these situations, it's not that. They told you up front what it was, but I think people trying to go into their first class don't understand how much time this stuff is going to take. And I talked about in my other program about teaching classes online is easy, not is that it takes a massive amount of time because the class is open 24/7. So the students are there around the clock and they expect that you're going to return their questions and queries really quickly. So it's again very different from traditional classroom. You got to look at the numbers up front. If the money is important to you, even if you don't need the money, quote unquote, but it's just the principle of it that you're insulted that someone would pay so little, then don't work there. Say no to that contract. There are certainly opportunities for online teaching as years went by, and I moved on to institutions and started to spend more and more time involved as an adjunct, and then create different opportunities in different areas of teaching, and then potentially just made decisions that I want to move more into full-time teaching, which I've done. I've turned down teaching opportunities at many institutions because I looked at what they were offering and I looked at what's important to me and I said no. One, it might be the salary. Two, you need to look at questions like, do they expect synchronous work? There's some online institutions that even though it's online, you're one place, the students are wherever, they'll demand in their contract terms that you're going to have to agree to have some sort of synchronous, meaning every Tuesday and Thursday from noon until 1:30 Central Time, you're going to be lecturing or logged on, giving a web availability or some sort of something where every single time, every week at the same time, you're going to be in some sort of synchronous environment. That is a very different environment than asynchronous teaching, which is, I would argue, sort of more of the standard. Asynchronous is because, you've got however many students. Again, look at the student enrollment caps. Do these classes limit themselves to 15 students or 20, 25 students, or are they 30, 40, or 50 students? And if your students are all over the world, and then typically the synchronous classes create huge struggles for the students because it's hard for them to feel like they're not being discriminated against, because no matter, whatever time is convenient wherever you are in the world is 3 a.m. somewhere else. And you have to remember that one of the things that I love about working internationally and also working online with my students around the world, and being part of an institution I am now, which is a global institution that has decades of teaching in Europe and Asia and all over the world, is a global perspective. So you understand that synchronous only works if you're in that time zone or close to it. If there's a synchronous component, then you need to think long and hard about whether or not that's going to fit your schedule. And it often makes it just as challenging as it would be in terms of timing than it is to go to campus, the same synchronous time every week. Why not just go to traditional campus if you're going to do that? Although some people love it. I don't, and that's typically, I've never accepted those contracts. If I thought the pay didn't match how much time it would take, I didn't accept it. If I thought the institution wasn't one that I was interested in learning about or curious about or felt that it could benefit me, I didn't accept it. You have to make these decisions. When you go and you say, I'm going to teach online, great, and then you do it, and then all you do is yell and scream about how horrible it is, that the students bother you all the time with questions and it takes so much time, then I'm not saying that there aren't pay structures and student enrollment caps that are just incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to teach effectively. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I think it does. But that's not my school. I didn't create that school. I don't run that school. If that's what somebody else wants to do and they've made that decision, then, what can I do? I can either go there as a student or not. I can either teach there as a faculty member or not. And that's all I can do. But to go there and then just be very upset about how horrible I think it is, to me, it's not logical. And I've done a lot of programs on this, in different settings, right? Do you stay or do you go? And this whole thing about, can you go into the situation and change an organization, as an employee, as a manager, as an executive? How realistic should you be about, what's going to make you be in a position where you are joyful? So you need to look at all of this. I'd look a lot about the synchronous. I'd look at the student cap numbers. How large are the classes? I'd look at the feedback. Some schools are run very much like any large corporation, and they'll literally tell you in your contract, if somebody sends you an email, you must respond in 4 hours or else, you'll be terminated. If somebody submits something to be graded, it must be graded within 24 hours or else. Some schools I've seen will submit work and not only tell you it has to be graded within 24 hours, but they'll tell you how it has to be graded. There must be 3 instances where you apply, Socratic questioning in your feedback. You must, on 2 occasions, insert feedback into Word documents. I mean, they'll literally give you these kind of requirements. Now, again, if you like that and think it's great, do it. If you think that this is not fair and you're not going to agree to this because you don't want to be tied to a 4-hour or 24-hour whatever requirement, and you don't want to be tied to literally a formula for how you grade, then you need to, again, ask yourself, is this the right place for me? Teaching online, from if you make the decisions based on what's important to you and you know what'll make you joyful, can be awesome. I will always be a proponent of teaching. I believe teaching traditional classroom can be awesome. I also know I work with a lot of people and encounter a lot of people who have shared events around the world for the last, 15 years that they don't like teaching. And they start to give me a litany of things that they don't like about that campus, whether it's traditional or online, about, whatever. I'm not saying that they're not accurate. All I'm saying is that if you get into a situation and you realize this isn't the right for me, then it's not right for you, and you have to make some decisions to set up a better outcome in the future. The thing about teaching online is these institutions tend to be, at this point, as the time I'm recording this program, the ones that have been doing it for a long time relative to the industry, right? Because all of this is new. I mean, the internet software, the online classroom, all this kind of stuff that exists today didn't exist, really even a decade ago. So what's happening is the institutions that have been in there are constantly fine-tuning their programs and processes. Some people say I want to teach online, but I'm used to traditional classroom teaching. I go in there, I create the syllabus, I create the assignments, and it's my class. I lead it the way I want to lead it. Some institutions let you do that. They're set up for traditional classroom type administration process. Other schools are not. They're the antithesis of that. They're run like, again, a big manufacturing or service industry where they're literally, again, tell you how many hours you have to do it, tell you just what you have to say in it, and some of them even have monitors that are constantly going to come in and write little reports and tell you, if you use the correct corporate requirements. So there's a huge variety of options out there. You need to be really clear with yourself up front about what you want out of it. And you need to be really honest before you accept one of these contracts about what you're used to. So again, if you come from traditional classroom teaching where the professor or faculty member determines basically everything, then you're not usually going to be happy in an environment where you're not allowed to do anything on your own. And vice versa. If you're coming to this and you've never taught ever in your whole life and you're used to sort of really strict requirements and step-by-step instructions, and then you were let loose in a class and told, hey, teach like you normally do. Just go create everything. Create a syllabus, pick the course materials, create the assessments, are there going to be quizzes or papers or whatever, and create the rubrics. That's a lot of work for somebody who's not used to that. And jumping into that, it overwhelms people, and then they don't do well. So there's a lot that you need to think about. What do you want out of it? The whole industry is changing, and just like technology is changing, there are starting to be more and more opportunities for people who teach distributed learning online that mirror traditional teaching positions that are full time in terms of either pay, benefits, things of that nature. But and I predict, if things sort of continue on the way I suspect, that you'll see more of that, because more institutions around the world are moving into it. And if you want to get the best faculty for your student outcomes, typically you put more resources into that. So things are constantly changing, but you need to be honest with yourself. You need to think about what you need to learn, what the learning curve is. You need to think about what your comfort level with technology is. And then you need to go back to this, I believe, my personal opinion, the core issue. Do you like teaching? Is it something that makes you happy? Is it something that when you don't do it, you miss it? Or is it something you just kind of fell into and you do it because you feel like you have to? And I think these are some questions I would ask no matter who I am or what I'm doing. But if you don't really get anything positive out of teaching at all, then it doesn't really matter whether it's traditional classroom, it's online, or anything else, because it's the same thing. I mean, you're still basically the same functions. It's done differently. But if there's not a core level of excitement about being an educator, it's something I'd revisit. So thank you so much for joining me today. As always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information.